Good Tavach and welcome to tonight's Shir. It's Motzei Shabbos Yisroi, and we may as well start with a little story which was chazed over by the Farbrengen today, which was in honor of the Rebbetzins Yortzeit and Chof Beis Shvat. And the story is that my sister-in-law lived, that's Rabbi and Mrs. Kesselman, they lived in an apartment on Albany Avenue. And like 2 doors away was the famous Albany bakery, where they would make the kosharim cake, which was used by the Rebbe's Farbrengens. If you need to know what kosharim cake is, send me an email. But meanwhile, so she lived there, and in order to supplement her parnosa, she would give art lessons. So there was a woman who was childless, and took her up into having art lessons. And one day, the Rebbetzin would come back she would go regularly to Long Island for a bit of fresh air, and she would stop off on the way back, and she would wait in the car, and the driver would go into the bakery and buy whatever was necessary. At any rate, so my sister-in-law says to her friend, says, "You want to see the Rebbetzin?" And so she comes to the window, and they locked eyes. She locked eyes with the Rebbetzin for a while. And Esther asks her, my sister-in-law asks her, she says that she's been for years waiting for a child, and she wanted to have a bracha, and she that was going through her thoughts when she was looking very intently at the Rebbetzin, that everyone was looking towards her. 9 months later, she gave birth to a girl. The interim, the Rebbetzin passed away, and the girl predictably was called Chaimushka. That girl's actually married to a nephew of mine. They live in Australia, and so that's the story of the Rebbetzin. Okay, let's go to our shir. So the first thing we have on our list is someone asks me about this tefillin protector. So instead of you struggling with these plastic ones, which sometimes are too tight, and the carton ones, which do fit or don't fit, you take an old hat and you put some felt in to make it fit. So this is a rubber structure, so it can kind of stretch a little bit to fit your tefillin. So someone asked me, is it Minhag Chabad or not? It's like the windows are, there's on all 5 sides, it's quite open. So they were asking whether it is appropriate or not according to Minhag Chabad. So actually, we once discussed something similar, and it was in Tafshin Pei Aleph. Kislev Tafshin Pei Aleph. We had on this shir, we had a discussion about the Rebbe, about the Rebbe Rashab pulling down his sleeve after putting on the Tefillin Shel Yad. And this is recorded, that's between Shel Yad and Shel Rosh. He would pull down his sleeve. I remember seeing Rebbe Sadia Liberov Olav Shalom doing so, and it was before I was able to read Ashkavta the Rebbe. And I was a bit surprised why he's being mafsik between Shel Yad and Shel Rosh in order to pull down his sleeve. And the way, so how do I remember when we discussed it? Because that shir, that part of the shir I wrote down, it's published in the Sefer Nesibim B'Halacha Minhag, which was printed last year, 2 years ago. So you have it written up, but there is something about so the way it's brought in Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, means you're allowed to cover the Shel Yad. But some poskim maintain that it's not only you're allowed to cover the Shel Yad, it's actually recommended to cover the Shel Yad. So then the covering the Shel Yad is part of the shleimus of the Hanuchas Tefillin Shel Yad that should be covered. That makes sense why there was this minhag of actually pulling down the sleeve. That used to be that the Shel Yad, on the one hand, the minhag is to uncover it when you make the bracha, but then to cover it during during davening, etc., or that's the shlemus of the Shalia that should be l'chol ha'os, should be covered. When the Rebbe came to America, this is how I was told, and don't ask me who it was because I don't remember, that the Rebbe wore long sleeves like most shirts, certainly in Europe, would be long sleeves. And someone saw him struggling to pull his sleeve down over his tefillin. And they told him that in America there's a certain invention called short sleeve shirts. And so the Rebbe apparently went for that. And if you remember pictures of the Rebbe with like long short sleeves which reach till almost the elbow. So you're able to kind of pull it over the tefillin without too much effort. The truth is that the Rebbe didn't always pull it down. You can sometimes see pictures. You can see the tefillin cover. The tefillin cover itself, sometimes the Rebbe, you can see on the pictures a red box, like the old tefillin boxes we used to be red. So this is just a bias, not the titura. Sometimes the Rebbe's tefillin box was actually cut out with several holes on the side also. I remember Rabbi Telsner having cut out his tefillin box on the side. And I asked him, he says, well, because I never used to do that. So, yeah, yesh v'yesh. I'm all there by zigaton, I'm all zigaton. So coming back to this thing, that this tefillin cover, mitzad echod, there's no Chabad minhag that has to be dafka from all four sides. It can have holes at the side. On the other hand, is it the minig bichlal to have the tefillin covered during davening? Yes, to some degree, and that's also because of tznius, because the upper part of the arm, the idea of lecholois is because it's normally a private area which is normally covered. So therefore, it would be appropriate to cover it. Well, once you're covering with the sleeve, the fact that the little box around it so what I'm suggesting is that the Rebbe put on the cover between Shel Yad and Shel Rosh, and to be kind of of L'chol Ois, that the tefillin should be covered. And that's instead of pulling down a sleeve, he put on the box between Shel Yad and Shel Rosh, mask him. So that's one Indian of L'chol Ois. At the same time, during davening, it should be somewhat covered because of the Indian of tznius, more than the L'chol Ois, which perhaps is achieved just by the little box. Let's move on. Now, I want to share with you a amazing Hashgacha Pratis. So, what happened is last Friday, I get a call. This is Friday a week. I get a call, and there's a Beis Chabad, and one of the tzaddikim who volunteer to make sure there's a Geshmak Kiddush. So he's asking. They have a hot cupboard, and they want to be able to put in food into the hot cupboard on Shabbos. So it should be warm and geschmack, and it shouldn't be dried out. Fine. So he asks me, they have this warming cupboard, hot cupboard, whatever it's called in English. So I ask him, how hot does it come? Does it reach? So he says, oh, 80 degrees, not so hot, it's only 80 degrees. So I'm thinking 80 degrees, that's a nice summer's day kind of thing. And so it says, doesn't get the Yatsi letters base. So I told him, yeah, it's all good, no problem. Then, so this was on Friday. He was asking me, can I, well, so then on Friday, Sunday morning, I get a message from Registrar on an email. I've seen several Botei Chabad that I try to want to warm up the food on Shabbos, and they get a Sephardi to put the food in because the Sephardim are more lenient on these halachas. And is it okay to get a Sephardi to put in the food to warm it up for the Ashkenazim to eat hot food? And as we were just having this conversation, I said, well, I just had this conversation on Friday, and then the penny clicked. When he said 80 degrees, he meant 18 celsius centigrade. And I was thinking in Fahrenheit. And therefore, the whole halacha, my whole psak, which I said on Friday, was totally wrong because if it is 43 degrees, 45 degrees is already Yatsi letters by. And therefore, there's no chance of you putting, certainly not liquid stuff, into an oven. Well, effectively, it's an oven because it's going to warm up stuff way beyond Yatsi letters by. It's not a conventional oven because you don't cook in a warming cupboard, but it can bring stuff to way beyond Yatsi letters by, and therefore no, you wouldn't be able to give it You wouldn't be able to put stuff there on Shabbos. Now, just to support this, I'm showing you on the screen from Rav Forkash's Sefer. That's Shabbos Halacha. And Baruch Hashem's got now 5 volumes. It's the first volume, and he writes the following: now in Eretz Yisrael, there's a new contraption called chimumit. The way I understand, and now the plug-in hot plate for Shabbos Plata, is very, very popular, but it's exposed. Someone has invented an idea making it into a box over it. So you've got the hot plate as the flats at the surface, and then it's got a cupboard over it, which has got little doors, or perhaps has a flap on top, and it contains the heat. So he says that's for sure. You can do chazara, subject. As he says a couple of points. You have to fulfill the tanoim of chazara, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. In addition, that you must have only one heat setting, because if if you can change the heat setting, that's called eina grufa ktuma. So if it's got just a single setting, just plug it in, and that's what it is. And you fulfill Tanoi Chazara, then you could put food. You're allowed to put food back. Now, to refresh your memory, Tanoi Chazara is number one. It has to be still hot. Learn it stanen legamri. Another one is oide biyodoi. Another one is daita lahachzir. And what's the other one? That has to be still in clearation. Now, taking food out of the fridge is definitely not oida biyodoi, and it's down in the gamri. So you have no fulfillment of the tanoia chazara. Then you can't do chazara into this chimomit. If you took it out, if you took it out for a few minutes to serve and put it back, that's where you can fulfill the tanoia chazara, like you can put back onto a blech. But not to take out stuff from the fridge and put it into it. That's in violation of the tanoia chazara. No chance. So now this also bothers me. This business, he says, you have to have the knob covered. And what would happen if you would put a piece of sticky tape over the knob? Would that solve your problem? So coming back, I'm going to go from the traditional cookers, yeah, traditional as in the last don't know how many years. You have knobs and you have the fire. So what do you have to cover? Do you have to cover the fire, or do you have to cover the knobs? So traditionally, we cover the fire. Some also cover the knobs. And it's not always so simple, because if it's electric stove, sometimes the knobs are up there and the fire is down here. So you're covering the fire. You also have to cover the knobs. Who says you have to cover the knobs? So this is a chidush of Ramesha Feinstein. Since the reason why you want to cover is so that you shouldn't come to be mechate, shem mechate. So therefore you have to cover the knobs. That's where you can do any adjustments can be done there. So you have to cover the adjustment area too. So Zalazagis, Rabbi Heller didn't accept that, and he said the following. This is back from 40 years ago when I was in Cologne. So he said the following. In the old style of cooking, they used to have wood or similar fuel, and that required continual engagement with the fire. The poking the fire was not a luxury. It was the seder, and therefore the shema yachata, that you might come to stoke the coals. This was a very real concern, because that was the style of it. Nowadays, relax. You put it on, turn it to the setting, and go back and do what you do. When you check your email, I don't know. You don't need to keep on tampering with the controls. So what's the shema yachata? So why do you have to cover the fire altogether? No, boss. Takonos Chazal, we have Kabbalah sale. They said you have to cover the fire. You have to cover the fire. But to say you have to cover the poker also, they never said this. So he was of the opinion, he may have changed his mind by now, but he was of the opinion that you're not mechuyev to cover the knobs. Now I'm seeing that Rav Forkash is saying you have to cover the knob, yeah, because if you don't cover the knob, it's no, he doesn't. No, he doesn't say you have to cover the knob. He just says if you have a knob which you can change, it's going to it's not grufa ktuma. So who says covering the knob helps? Yeah, you follow what I'm saying? If you say you're not mechuyev to cover the knobs, so who says covering the knob solves the problem? If you say mechuyev to cover the knobs, then covering the knob makes it grufa ktuma. But if you're not mechuyev to cover the knobs, so covering the knob makes no difference. So then, if so, I'm back to a little bit confused here. Yeah, whether if it does have a knob, does does it help to cover the knobs? Okay. Now, Kalponim, this is where we have so far that Chazorah to take stuff out of the fridge and to put it into this warming cupboard. That which I mean beyond Yad Sheleda's Bay, that's definitely not okay, at least for Ashkenazim. Sfaradim, okay. So then we have another question: can I ask a Sfaradi to do something which I wouldn't be allowed to do? And typically in this area where in cooking on Shabbos, so we have a klal, ein bishul achar bishul, that once something is cooked, reheating is not called cooking, but that doesn't apply to liquids. And the ruling is that dovalach, a liquid, yesh bei bishul achar bishul. A liquid is yesh bei bishul achar bishul. There are those who disagree. And the haminig is, if it's not totally cooled off, still a little bit appreciably warm, then you can reheat it. If it's totally cold, then we say yesh bishalach abishal badovalach, and you're not allowed to reheat it, even for the abbot. So now the question is, can I ask a Sephardi to do something which I wouldn't do? So why am I not allowed to warm up a liquid? Is it because I hold it's usur, or because I want to be machmir? And that's really, you have to analyze these words of the Alter Rebbe when he brings the psak. And the Ashkenazi psak. On the one hand, we say if it's still a little bit warm, even then less than Yad Sheleda's boy, you're allowed to warm it up. And yet, if it's Nistan Legamri, we say it's considered bishul. Is that a psak or is that a chumrah? And that's really where the question of delegating to a Sephardi would come in. If it's a chumrah, then you could ask someone who's not machmir. If you see it as that's a psak that you're not allowed to, then you wouldn't be allowed to delegate. Right, let's go. Then, exactly, if I did want to do chazorah into an oven, so then I would need to have a grufo ktuma. Now, what to explain this? Grufo ktuma means in those times you'd have to rake out the coals, or you'd scatter ash on the old coal, on the coals. They're smoldering. You scatter ash, and that's a statement of detachment. Putting a blech, a sheet of metal, this is a statement also of disengagement. That's the equivalent of the ktum. The question is, how do you do that in an oven? Can you, what's to explain? I'm not talking about leaving food in the oven and taking it out on Shabbos. That's another discussion. I'm talking about if you have your oven set up that you could take food out of the oven, if you want to put it back. So let's go through this carefully. Really, in Shulchan Aruch and the in Gemara, it says tanur. There's no chazorah allowed into a tanur. A tanur was in intense heat, and there was a concern putting chazorah back would be shemi yachata, whatever it may be. You wouldn't be allowed to do chazorah into an oven. So therefore, you read in Shmiras Shabbos Kilchoso, there's no chazorah into an oven. And if despite that, many contemporary poskim, Rav Forkash included, say you are allowed to do chazorah in our ovens, and they say our ovens are not like the ovens of old. And I was curious, how do you know that? So they come up with the following explanation. When they used, I don't know what the right word is, when they used wood or coal to make a hot oven, they had to really make it very, very hot, and that would last for hours. Nowadays, we've got a much more controlled supply of heat. You can have, if I want the oven to be warm 5 hours later, I don't have to stoke it, full of fuel now, even if I have a little bit, because it's going to continue. Whereas in those times, they had to stoke it much more, so that it should be still hot 5 hours later, something on those lines. Therefore, they say nowadays we do not have the intensity of Tanur as they had in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara. And as a result, although the Gemara says there's no permission to do Chazorah into a Tanur, nowadays our ovens are not so intense, so you are allowed to do Chazorah into an oven. Of course, you have to deal with the thermostat is opening the door, going to allow warm air, cool air to affect the thermostat, and so on. That can be dealt with. Some ovens have got what's called Matzav Shabbat. They've got some control to isolate or to disengage the thermostat. Okay. But then what about the Chazorah? How do you do Grufa Ktuma? How do you do that? How do you cover the fire in the oven? So this is where we have a bit of a problem, especially with electric oven. How do you cover? So he brings here, some say, that you'd have to put in a box into the oven because the heat is from all sides. You'd have to put in some kind of box in the oven. Or you cover the walls with silver foil. Others say that if you put a blech, if it covers one of the walls, that's also enough to allow chazorah into an oven. All right, I've never really had this question about chazorah into an oven. I've just found it an interesting thing to share with you. But if a certain person does want to do chazorah into an oven, I mean, ask for proper guidance. Especially as I say, a regular electric oven is asking for problems because it's got a thermostat, and by opening the door, you have a gush of cool air into the oven, and that's going to make the thermostat wake up and make more power, and that's going to be a problem. Okay, so now I'm going to go into our next question, but before that, I think I saw there was one question on the chat. If sliding doors to a warming oven were accidentally left open before Shabbos, can you close them on Shabbos? That would very much depend whether there is a thermostat in this oven. And if there's just like you have the Shabbos mode and the urns, it's just a low temperature all the way through. It doesn't go on and off. And I believe some of these warming ovens also, it's just a low temperature without a thermostat, then you would be allowed to close the doors. If there is a thermostat, then that wouldn't be okay. But before you use that warming oven, then you also have to deal with if there is a control button. If it has, then we have a Meister with Grufuk Tumma, which we discussed. Okay, let's come to question number 3. So here's the following scenario. A nice sweet shliach. He is in a town where there's someone in America, like we call the Young Israel type of community, and the rabbi has arranged shlachmonas and Purim. And what they're going to do is that every family will give to another family. So not individuals to individuals, but every family to another family. And he wanted to upgrade the shlachmonas in the way that it should be from one individual to individual. But he has two issues. One is perhaps the logistics and the costs, but then also he doesn't really want to rock the boat too much with the local rabbi. So he was thinking of bringing one nice packet of shlachmonas and then pass the parcel. So Reuven gives the Shimon, goes, and goes all the way around the shul, and everyone's on shlachmonas because everyone's giving shlachmonas to another person. So he's asking, has that got any value? So two things which I responded to him. First of all, what the rabbi has instituted. So you have in Shulchan Aruch about Mashlachmonis, Machlifim Chaveiroi. You can do a shaleach. I give you my suda and you give me your suda, and we're both done shlachmonis. Now, it says and then we have here in the Mishnah Berurah, quoting from Magen Avraham, he says, Noshim Bichlal, that women should also be giving. It says Isha Chayeves. So he says that Noshim should also give their own shlachmonas. Because of Magen Avraham, I haven't seen people particular that a woman should give separate shlachmonas to her husband. When it says that Noshim Abichlal means almonus living alone, then she has to give her own shlachmonas. But a woman who's married to the husband, so the husband gives mashlachmonas to various other people, and is yotze for her too. In my house, it's the other way around. My wife gives shlachmonas, so I'm yotze with. Really, I try to do it by myself. Yeah, But at any rate, so you can be, you say you have the Magen Avraham kind of does come to terms with a family giving to a family. And therefore, that which the rabbis instituted there has got a basis. Yeah, that's number one. So now the question is, this pass the parcel kind of shlachmanis. Is there any value in that? So here, what you have on the top of the screen is from the Dirshu edition of Mishnah Berurah. So it has like this: if I would give shlachmanis on condition that you give it back. So Shetzarchio and Reb Shlomo Zalman says, Mistama, you're not yaitz. That's just you're doing business deals, not shlachmanis. So you give shlachmanis, it means the person's able to keep it. Perhaps he chooses to give it back, but he has a choice to keep it. But in a way that you say, no, you can't keep it because, keep the parcel going round to the next one, that doesn't seem to be achieving anything. So I told him it's not worth it. It doesn't achieve anything. And what the rabbi has instituted does scrape through the halacha. So just leave it and don't ruffle people. Okay, next. The bracha on onion rings, which are coated with breadcrumbs. So someone sends me this picture of onion rings. The way I understood is that they are minced onions and then made into rings, which it says here, made from fresh minced onions. So it's not that they've taken onion and cut them into rings and fried them. They actually mince the onions and somehow make them into donut forms, and then they fry them. But they before that they coat them in breadcrumbs. Now here on the label, at the back of the packet, it says Beis Shahakol, and you know why it doesn't say Birchos Shahakol? If they'd write Birchos Shahakol, that would be a halacha. That would be a chiyuv to cut out that piece and put it in shemas. So they just write Beis Shahakol. Okay. At any rate, so they've written there the brachas shahakol. He's asking what would be according to Chabad, according to the Alter Rebbe, what would be the bracha on these onion rings. So I wrote to him back, what bracha do you make on schnitzel? So he says, I do say shahakol, although in svara it should be mesinas. Okay, so now let's go to schnitzel and come back to our onion rings. So he's absolutely right. The minhag olam is to say shahakol on schnitzel, despite the fact it's coated with breadcrumbs, which have been soaked in egg, and then with breadcrumbs. And this is from a sefer called Shari HaBrocha, an excellent sefer on brochas, contemporary. Some say if the coating it has a gishmak taste on its own, you should make it mezonis. Minhag olam is you make shahakol, you say shahakol on schnitzel, and that includes the coating. And he refers us to his ha'ara. So now here's the question. Normally we have a klal that when there's a combination of various ingredients, so then dogon ikar. The Lashon of the Gemara, you might have salka daitoch duvshe ikar. Mashmalon dogon ikar. You might have thought that it's a sweet, so the main thing is the honey, whatever, and therefore it'd be shahakal. So no, when there's a combination, so then the dominant feature, the dominant component is in halacha is seen as the grain element. Despite that, in this context, they say no, we're going to ignore the coating. We're going to look at the schnitzel itself. So he quotes Rav Wosner. He says even if a thick coating and it actually adds to the taste, well, it still remains a shahakal. Because this rule of kol sheyesh min dogan ein bottle, that means when the dogon is part of the food, let's say you have a salad, or you have some kind of, or a kind of bread which is made of various components, and some of it is wheat flour, some is tapioca. So then you'd say dogon is ikir. But when we have here a coating to schnitzel, he uses the toffel be'etzem. Yeah, it's interesting to use the word be'etzem in Chassidus. We talk about etzem, and here you talk toffel be'etzem. Okay, and the coating is not a thing which you eat on. Which once it's there, you eat it, but it's not the thing which you would make a food out of a fried coating. And Rav Wosner was of the opinion that if to say a mezonos on the coating separately would be a chash bracha levatal. There are those who disagree. But going back to this opinion, which is certainly the more popular opinion, that to make a bracha shehakol on schnitzel, so it follows also that these onion rings, which I don't know, that depends on your preference. If your main thing is you enjoy the onions, just you like it with the coating, then it would be shehakol. If you actually there's another way. Sometimes by the functions they have real onions cut in circles and they fry them in lots of batter, and it's actually more like it's more like a kind of a food, a pastry. It's just it's got a bit of onion flavor to it. Then that would take a be mazonas. Right. What's our next thing on our list? Okay. So here again, I had the same shaila almost from two different people in a short space of time. So one person asked me that he had gone into the base, how can you say, and come out, and before washing his hands, had touched food. Does that food become contaminated to the degree that you shouldn't be allowed to eat it? That's one question. And then another person asked me that she had taken some fruit leather in a packet and take it into the Besakis and come out. Is she not allowed to eat that fruit leather? So it is confusing because I can see where they're coming from. We know that you don't touch food before you wash negel vase in the morning. And there's a business of ruach hatumah, and that remains a residue of tumah on your hands, and that can affect the food. That's written in the Gemara, Yad Yad Lachovis Dikotzet, Yad etc. It talks about not touching food with the ruach hatumah still there. But apparently, not all ruchos hatumah are made of the same spirit. And so they have a ruach hatumah which is written about when you woke up in the morning. That doesn't apply to going into a Beis HaKiseh, whether that. All right, so now you have here 2 points. One is again from Rav Vosner, Shevet HaLevi, very short, food which is taken to Beis HaKiseh inside a can. You can be mekel, if it's open, FG should be machmir, but in nowadays with our Beis HaKiseh, you don't have to be so, you can be mekel also, and that's because when the Gemara talks about a Beis HaKiseh, it would be where the schmutz would remain there, whereas our Beis HaKisses is everything flushed away, so therefore it's much less of a residue of, of, um, well, whatever it is, or of the objectionable matter, and therefore there's less of a problem of ruach hatumah, etc. So that's Rav Vosner. Then we have here, this is from the Minchas Yitzchak. So someone had asked a very similar question where they have a simcha in a house, and to be able to they don't have a big enough freezer, so they buy up blocks of ice and they put it in the bath, and then they put the food on the ice in the bath, and then are you allowed to use the food which has been in the bathroom? That was his question. So he responds to this, and he says this idea that food which has been brought into a bathroom, into a toilet, has any element of Issa, has no source at all in Shas, and you can see it says in the Avud Arham talks about a drink making a brocha. You can't make a brocha in the merchet, so you must make a brocha outside. Where does it come from? So you have here that there's a certain sefer called Divrei Yitzchak who writes that he heard from the Belzerov, Reb Sholem of Belz, that you shouldn't eat food which was in a Beis HaKiseh. But then he brings from a different sefer, Lekutei Mariach, who says he brings from a sefer, perhaps Shalmei Tzibor, and I didn't look it up, and he says that the Ruach Harov, the Beis HaKiseh, is something which clings to a person. The person has got kedusha, so then the Ruach Harov clings to the person. It doesn't cling to water or to eitzim. All right, so we know that having just read what we read there, we know that the Rebbe was particular for Negelwasser, etc., not to take from the Besakisse, and the Rebbe would be particular to take it from the water from the kitchen and not from, and also when the Rebbe went to visit Mochin Chana, apparently, so the Rebbe had a guided tour, and he made this comment that there should be a provision to be able to take water for Negelwasser, not from the bathrooms. So taking water out of the bathroom is something we would avoid lechatchila. To say that it's also b'diavad, I wouldn't say. Also, when it's covered, as you see in Rav Osner saying, if it's covered, then there'd be room to be made. Okay. Now here's a very serious question, and that's number 7, and that is, oh, I'm just looking at the numbers. That should be 6, not 8. Right. So now here's a question. Someone sold their property to a Hamashid, and the agreement was take your time, but up till a year, you can move in and you can remodel it, whatever. But by a year, you should complete. And meanwhile, there's also included a clause that if you don't complete on time, there will be a penalty. And predictably, the time has passed, and now that clause is so the lawyer is calling me, solicitor, and reading the clause of the penalty, it says for every month of a delay, there's going to be, I don't remember the details, but it was somehow linked to the interest rate, the base rate or something like that. So they're asking, is there a problem of ribis or not? So you can see here from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Ribis, when you have a penalty, it's only when the entire penalty is imposed in one moment. When you've overstepped the time limit, there is a penalty. This is talking about business, not about loans. But if the penalty will be ma'at, if it's going to be accrued over time, then, and from each month of each week or each month, there's going to be an increase. He says it's ribis gemura shel Torah. So that's how the Alter Rebbe talks about this. And this is from a contemporary sefer called Torah's Ribis from Haishirik, where he writes the same, he brings the Alter Rebbe actually, when we talk about a penalty, it's only if it's a one-off penalty. But if it is established, if it's agreed that the penalty will increase, the longer it is the delay, then it would be in coming to consider ribis. He says it's ribis ksutsa. Some say it's ribis drabonon. Either way, it's not okay. I repeated this last night. I rehearsed for this year on Friday night, in after davening, and we have present one of the Choshev Rabbonim who lives down the road. He davens by us Friday night, and he says that's a well-known thing that a Hamish, a very common thing that the Hamish didn't know that you have to take out that clause. You cannot have a clause of a penalty to be increasing. It's a dova poshut, and it's not only a question of paying it. There mustn't be a star. There mustn't be a contract which obliges ribis. And if a contract is drawn up which is obliging the ribis to be paid, it's not only a question for the borrower, it's not only a question for the lender, it's also a question for the lawyer, because Loisa Simun or Lov Neshach, Loisa Simun includes not only the lender, but also the sofer, says clearly in the Gemara. The sofer and the Edim, if they put their signature, if they contribute to forming a contract which is charging ribis, then they are also part of the violation of ribis. And so the person who asked the question, or the lawyer is asking behalf of the family, I know they're a very from family, and it was, even though it was talking about four digits here, and but I knew that they would not want to, so I said no, it's not okay to ask for this payment, and it shouldn't have been there in the first place. Let's move on. a penalty remains the same each month. No, it's a one-off penalty. A one-off penalty means that it's whether you stay off, whether it's a month or 10 months, it's the same penalty. That's also not on a loan, that's on a sale. If it's going to be building up for every month, it's another X amount, then that would still be also because it's increasing. In other words, basically you're saying because I'm waiting for my money, therefore you're going to pay me more money. That's ribis. That's not okay. Right. Let's now here I want to address. I keep on getting this question, and I want to. Is it about its meaning not to have make kiddush in the seventh hour? So, actually, someone told me today that he heard from Zalman Shimon that in Russia they weren't in Lubavitch they weren't so makbid. So you have this business of not making kiddush between 6 and 7. It's brought in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. Yesh nizhorim. All right. So when you have so this person said to me tonight, he said that he was once in Montreal, and Greenglass was there, and he was staying eating by family, and the young man didn't want to make kiddush because it's between 6 and 7, but his elderly mother was there, and Sir Rav Gringa said, "Make kiddush right away. She's waiting. This is Yeshnis Horim, it's a chumrah. There's a mitzvah in HaTorah, this week said of Kabbalah Savicha Vesimecha, don't make your mother wait." So he told him to make kiddush right away. Right, so there are going to be circumstances where we'll say that this zehirus is going to be overridden by other considerations. Granted, but is it Chabad minig to be to try to avoid it? And the question is absolutely yes, it is our minig. How do I know that? So there's a rule in halacha that when you see the Gemara discussing a particular opinion extensively, that tells you that sugya de alma kavoseh, that means that is the halacha. The fact that we've got, now what I'm just showing you without going into detail, you have here, this is from the Shulchan Menachem, the Rebbe's in Yonim and Halacha and Minig. So the Rebbe talks about how to work out, is it Shoyas Amtsoyas, Shoyas Amitiyos, and is it applying Eretz Yisrael or not? What happens if you've got guests? So here's a letter of the Rebbe. Someone says, "Oh, because of Chanos Orchim." The Rebbe's response is, "Well, the guests are also, the minig of not making kiddush applies to the guests as well as yourself. Depends who your guests are, yeah." So to say that it's not the Babbage minig is even though it wasn't necessarily they were not Zohim, but the fact you got so much discussion in the Rebbe's letters and in Anash.org about this. So it's obvious that Anash generally are particular about this. And if you see someone who isn't in particular, it's because they've got other considerations, whether it's because of hafotza, whether it's because of whatever other needs. But the default position is that we try to be careful about avoiding making kiddush within this time. Right. So we had on point 9, I don't have any slides for that. We had a discussion about a man davening mincha after he lit candles. And if it has to be Mekabel Shabbos, so how can he daven mincha? And I mentioned that someone had asked the question that in Kabbalah's Shabbos, there can be two levels. Now, the Alter Rebbe talks about this in Kuntras Achron and Siman Reis Samach Aleph. There's Mekabel just to avoid Malacha, and there's Mekabel Yisumah Shel Yom. And he was asking that perhaps if a man lights candles, perhaps it's a Mekabel Issa Malacha after 10 minutes, but who says a Mekabel Yisumah Shel Yom, and therefore you can't daven mincha? But then it says clearly in Shulchan Aruch that a woman should daven mincha before, because after she benches lich, she won't be able to daven mincha. So if a woman is prevented from davening mincha afterwards, it looks like Kabbalah Shabbos through lighting candles is Itzuma Shel Yom. So I want to backtrack on that a little bit and say the following. Possibly a woman, because women are not necessarily so careful of davening ma'ariv, so when she lights her candles, that's all she's going to do for Mekabel Shabbos. So therefore, but for a woman, it's Kabbalah Tzimah Shel Yom. It's all the way. a man who's lighting candles, and then he's going to go to shul and daven Ma'ariv, and he's going to Kabbalah Shabbos, especially in the summer, you're going to, Kabbalah Shabbos is before the Zman. So for a man who's going to be Kabbalah Shabbos in through tefillah at a later point, so perhaps his lighting candles isn't Kabbalah Sitzum Shiyom. So therefore, it's Nushkin Raya. The fact that it says by a woman her lighting candles precludes her from davening mincha. It's not necessarily an objection by a man. That's just wanted to add to that discussion. And the last thing on our agenda for tonight, in Katzer, yeah. So just the last thing I want to add to our discussion about Paris Map and Mekadesh, and this again and again as it's getting closer to Purim, it's getting all busy. People are thinking how they can do possibly a Sudas Purim starting off on Friday afternoon, and then it's going to overflow into Shabbos, and to stop in the middle of the meal. Let's say they'll start the meal half an hour before Lichtzenden, and then they'll stop for Lichtzenden, and then make Kiddush, and then continue with Paris Map and Mekadesh. And so we've discussed this before, and I just want to add, so someone sent me a number of sichos, etc. But this is from Tovshin Memches, and it was a Farbrengen Simchas Torah going into Shabbos, and the Rebbe washed Netilas Yadayim. This is the last time the Rebbe did this. As I mentioned last week, that after the Rebbetzin passed away, there was no longer this Seder of the Rebbe washing and going into Farbrengen into Shabbos, because the Rebbe benched Licht in his own room. But here's when the Rebbetzin was benching Licht, so he could wash. And then he said that they should announce that they should, after Shkia, there's no eating and drinking, because we're not Paris Map and Mekadesh. He told a few people to say L'chaim, and people, then he says, since after the Shkia you can't say L'chaim, therefore, well, at least we'll discuss about L'chaim. Then he has here, he writes, Mikivan she'ein person mapa mekadshim la'acheri she'posku b'nino gebein b'chabad. So although this was done in earlier generations, and early, in even the Rebbe's times, in earlier times, there was someone would make Kiddush and be a Motzi de Olam in the way of Paris Mapa Mekadesh, but this, the Rebbe says, was posku lina gekach b'chabad. So in Chabad, in the community, Paris Mapa Mekadesh is not a recommended practice. Doesn't mean that when you have people who otherwise couldn't have a Sudas Purim and you want to be cater for them, I don't think it precludes that. You can do Paris Mapa Mekadesh for them. And as I said last time, what I would recommend if a Shliach wants to do this, if he doesn't wash earlier, I mean, he has his Sudas Purim earlier in the day, and then the people will wash and they start off their meal before Lichtzenden, and then after Lichtzenden, he will make Kiddush normal, make and wash Netilas Yadayim normal, make a Hamotzi normal. It just looked like any other Shabbos. I think that would be more glatt. If he needs to make Paris Mekadesh for them, for himself, to avoid that for himself. That's what I have to say for tonight. And someone's asking, is there a difference about using foundations using white wine? Well, those who say such a thing, it doesn't really have a proper basis. But someone was quite persistent last week and saying he needs to make Kiddush between 6 and 7 because of Orch and whatever. Is an advantage of making wine. Okay, it does diminish it somewhat, but generally it's not in itself a solution. Okay, I wish you all a good tavoch, and we should hear Besuras Toves, Besuras Hageula, Sechazenu Einenu, Beshuvcha L'Tzion Berachmim, Malkeinu Bereishenu.
Amen.
Thank you.
Good work, man.
My name instead of yours.